Thank you for clicking on our portion of the video, and we're talking about the Wagner Act.
So, what did the Wagner Act actually affect? Well, quite simply, it affected the negotiation power between companies and their workers. What had previously occurred is that the companies had no real motivation to reach any sort of settlement with the worker unions because the unions were not legally recognized as unions under the law. However, the Wagner Act provided the legal recognition as unions that they so desperately needed, and this sort of forced the companies' hands into reaching some sort of settlement with these unions. While this may seem like a horrible occurrence for the companies, in actuality it was not. It provided them a splendid platform for them to actually reach some sort of settlement with the workers to ensure that they stayed and that they actually had some sort of workforce for the company to work on. This also allowed the workers to reach whatever pay and benefits that they wanted and assured that they would stay in the workplace rather than go home and
What exactly
starve.
caused the Wagner Act to come into action? The 1930s saw a rise of disgruntled workers who began to form unions and groups due to unsatisfactory work conditions they had been faced with at the time. This ranged from everything from a lack of pay for workers brought upon by the declining economy all the way to the lack of negotiation between workers and companies. Sometimes, when agreements just could not be reached by either side, workers would be turned to rioting and strikes in hopes of pushing employers to reach a resolution. Although the blame for a lack of cooperation might easily be pinned upon the companies, it must be acknowledged that the economy had also put pressure on the companies who had their financial assets limited and were forced to raise prices on their merchandise simply to pay the workers they employed. And this financial stress sometimes could only be resolved with the laying off of workers in order to keep their produce at a reasonable price. Act revolutionary at the time. Well, up until this time, companies had mass control over their workforce. While obviously riots had taken place and there was the occasional incident where a company would have to bow down to the demands of the workers, companies ultimately had the only say in how a workplace was run. The concept of legally recognized unions, protected under law, was a very progressive idea, and as hopeful as it might have been, many also saw it as a threat that could possibly lead to a substantial lack of power of the companies themselves.
Now, has the Wagner Act proven to be successful nowadays? Yes, indeed it has. Nowadays, when unions go against companies, there isn't that stigma of them just being mobs. Nowadays, unions are more organized, and although it is still a daunting task to go against a company, they feel more comfortable having been faced with previous examples where unions going against companies actually work. Workers nowadays can feel comfortable that their voices will be heard and that they will get the adequate pay and benefits that they want. A prime example of this would be the 2011 NBA lockout. What had happened was the players were dissatisfied with their pay because they felt that it was not fair when compared to the overall revenue pulled in by the NBA in the past seasons. Now, the NBA tried defending their rationale, and the manager said that the players were given an adequate amount of pay regardless of how successful the NBA had proven to be over the last couple of seasons. Now, what is significant about this is that even though the NBA is quite possibly one of the largest organizations in the United States, and even though the players need the NBA, obviously, or they'd be out of a job, the fact that they actually won the settlement is not so much as surprising as it is comforting. Now, all the players joined under the National Basketball Players Association, otherwise known as the NBPA, and this organization led to the lockout, which basically meant that all the players just stopped playing. Obviously, this is detrimental to the NBA because without no games, they have no company. This was a peaceful demonstration and showed that unions were capable or are capable of going against the company with other means that aren't violent. And this is very important because if the Wagner Act had not been installed in any matter, companies and players would be forced to go to more violent means regardless of whether or not it can be deemed necessary. So the Wagner Act has proven to be successful nowadays because it is shown by the NBA lockout and various other events that companies and the workers can work together regardless of a higher dispute and don't have to resort to such nasty tactics such as violence or other means.
Misconceptions that may be drawn about the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act was put into place on order for workers to reach a fair level with their employers on terms of negotiation power, and so workers would not feel compelled to leave the workplace. In no way was this act implemented for workers to achieve a higher level of power than their employers. The act simply ensures that workers can join legally recognized unions in order for them to peacefully negotiate with their place of work, not for workers to abuse their employees into reaching unreasonable ends.
Thank you for watching our video about the Wagner Act, and we hope you found the information we presented as insightful as we did. However, there are still many things to learn about the 1930s, such as its economic, political, and artistic sides. Now, if you would like to listen to more economic standpoints of the 1930s, you are more than welcome to click here. If you want to listen to the more political and social problems of the 1930s, you can click here. And finally, if you would like to learn more about the artistic side of the 1930s, you can click here. Thank you for watching our video, and we hope you enjoyed the rest of your journey through the 1930s. Thank you.